Mildred Hayes never missed her checkups. At 66, she had her routines, morning tea, a slow walk around the block, and her annual breast exam every February. She'd done it every year since her sister passed from cancer. Better to know, she always told her daughter, even if it's scary. That February morning felt ordinary. The clinic smelt faintly of disinfectant and coffee. The nurse smiled as Mildred settled into the chair for her scan. "The new machine makes it faster," she said, "all analyzed by computer now." Mildred smiled back. "Well, long as it's smarter than me." The nurse laughed softly. "Smarter, maybe. Tired, never." A week later, Mildred sat in the waiting room with her coat folded neatly on her lap. The doctor entered holding a tablet. "Good news, Mrs. Hayes," he said with a practiced smile. "Your scan came back clean, no signs of malignancy." Mildred let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "So I'm good?" "You're good," he confirmed. "The AI report says everything looks normal." She nodded slowly. "AI?" "Yes," he said, "Autopath. It reads the images and compares them to thousands of others, much faster than a human review." Mildred smiled faintly. "Machines working overtime, huh?" He chuckled. "Exactly. We use it for almost all screenings now. Cuts down wait time and human error." "Human error," she repeated quietly. "Guess that's progress." That night, she called her daughter Laverne. "All clear, baby," she said cheerfully. "The doctor said I'm good as gold." Laverne exhaled in relief. "See, I told you everything would be fine. Maybe now you'll stop worrying." Mildred laughed. "Worrying's what keeps me breathing." Spring turned to summer. Mildred went on with her life. Church on Sundays, gardening on Tuesdays, volunteering at the local library. She still felt strong, though sometimes she noticed a dull ache under her left arm. Probably the humidity, she told herself. But by September, she felt something new, a small, hard knot beneath her skin. It wasn't big, just stubborn. She pressed her hand against it one morning, standing in front of the bathroom mirror. "Must be a muscle," she muttered. But muscles didn't stay that long. A week later, she mentioned it to her neighbor, Miss Ruby. "I had the same thing," Ruby said softly. "You should go back, honey." Mildred shook her head. "They already checked me. The computer said I was fine." Ruby looked uneasy. "Then let a person check you this time." By October, the lump had grown. Mildred finally called the clinic. The nurse on the phone sounded polite but brisk. "Your last scan was normal, Mrs. Hayes. Are you sure it's not irritation?" "I'm sure," Mildred said firmly. "I know my own body." After a pause, the nurse sighed. "We can schedule a follow-up in 6 weeks." 6 weeks? That's the earliest opening. But you're low priority, since your last test was clear. Mildred hung up slowly. Low priority. The phrase stung. That night, she wrote in her small journal. "The machine said I'm fine, but my body disagrees. I don't know who to trust anymore." 2 days later, she woke with a sharp pain under her arm. Laverne insisted on driving her to the emergency clinic. The new doctor examined her quietly and frowned. "How long has this been here?" "Months, maybe," Mildred said. "My last test said I was clean." The doctor glanced at the screen. "Autopath?" "Yes, that's the one." He sighed. "Sometimes it misses early growth in darker tissue. The contrast isn't always clear." Mildred blinked. "You mean it couldn't see me right?" He nodded gently. "It's not designed that way on purpose, ma'am. It's just the data it learned from." She let out a slow breath. "So I got the wrong answer because the machine didn't know my color?" He hesitated. "Because the machine didn't learn from it." Mildred left the clinic with a biopsy appointment and a hollow ache in her chest. As she sat in the car, Laverne reached over and held her hand. "They said it's probably small," Laverne said. "They'll fix it." Mildred nodded, staring out the window. "I used to think the danger was not checking." Turns out the danger was checking and believing the machine. The computer gave her the all clear. It was built to be fast, not fair. For Mildred, the test result wasn't wrong by accident. It was wrong by design. Laverne couldn't stop thinking about what the doctor said. The data it learned from. The words sounded technical, but to her, they felt personal. That night, after her mother had gone to bed, she sat at the kitchen table with her laptop. She typed AutoPath AI pathology system into the search bar. Dozens of articles appeared, all praising the technology for revolutionizing early cancer detection. Every headline sounded the same: faster, cheaper, smarter. But buried halfway down one page, she found a line that made her stop. Initial model training conducted primarily on datasets sourced from European clinical archives. European, not American, not diverse. She read it again, her heart sinking. The next morning, she printed the article and brought it to the hospital. The same young technician who'd run Mildred's scan was behind the desk. "Excuse me," Laverne said politely, "can I ask a question? What does it mean that this system was trained on European data?" The technician glanced at the paper and shifted uncomfortably. "It just means the images they used to teach the computer came from studies overseas. It doesn't change how it works." "But if the pictures all look a certain way, won't it get confused by something different?" The technician hesitated. "I'm not really supposed to discuss the details, ma'am." Laverne leaned closer. "Well, my mother might lose her breast because of those details." Later that day, Mildred's doctor called with the biopsy results. "It's malignant," he said gently, "but it's small, and we caught it in time." Mildred closed her eyes. "You caught it, not the computer." He didn't argue. "You're right." After she hung up, she turned to her daughter. "He said the machine used pictures from people overseas. Did they think my cells didn't matter?" Laverne tried to answer, but her voice broke. Mildred reached across the table, her voice calm. "Don't cry, baby. Just make sure they learn from this." 2 weeks later, during her follow-up, Mildred asked the doctor to explain the machine. He pulled out a diagram. "AutoPath works by comparing millions of biopsy images," he said. "It looks for patterns that match cancerous cells." She squinted at the page. "So it's guessing?" "In a way," he admitted. "It uses probability." "And those pictures? They all come from people who don't look like me?" He hesitated. "Mostly lighter skin tones, yes." She nodded slowly. "So it didn't see what it wasn't shown." The doctor smiled sadly. "That's one way to put it." At home, Mildred wrote in her journal, "The computer didn't see me because it never learned to. They say it's not personal, but it feels like it is." The following Sunday at church, she shared what happened during prayer group. The women gasped when she told them. "They said the machine didn't recognize it," she explained. One of the older women, Sister Bernice, shook her head. "Same thing happened to my cousin in Georgia. They said her scan was normal. By the time they found it, it had spread." Mildred felt a chill. How many of us got told we were fine? Laverne decided to ask a friend from college who worked in medical research. He explained it over coffee. These systems learn from past data. If the data's not diverse, the system assumes everyone looks like the examples it saw. So it sees some people better than others? He nodded. Exactly. And the companies call that progress. Laverne frowned. Progress for who? He sighed. The ones who fit the data. That night, Mildred sat with her daughter at the table. She spoke quietly, but every word felt like a weight. "They said the computer was faster," she said. "But fast didn't save me. Care did." Laverne nodded. "Then maybe it's time the system learned the difference." AutoPath was built to recognize illness, but only the kind it had seen before. To everyone else, it offered confidence without caution. Technology isn't cruel by nature. It's cruel by neglect. Before bed, Mildred wrote another note in her journal. They built a mirror that could see everything except me. Now they'll have to look twice. Next, Mildred learns what the computer never measured, how it confused pigment for health, and why her body paid the price for its blindness. Mildred used to trust the quiet hum of machines, the sound of her washing machine, her sewing machine, even her old radio at night. All steady, predictable, comforting. But now, that hum reminded her of something colder. A machine that had looked right through her and called her normal. After the biopsy, she began reading everything she could find about Autopath. The pamphlets called it cutting edge, data-driven, error-free. But the words felt hollow. Error-free for who, she wondered. One night, she called her friend Ruby. You ever notice how these machines never make mistakes with other people's bodies? Ruby laughed sadly. Honey, they just don't make mistakes anyone notices. At her next appointment, Mildred met a young technician named Dr. Lin. He looked nervous as he reviewed her old test. You see this? He said, pointing to a faint shadow on the screen. This area should have been flagged. But it wasn't, Mildred said. He nodded. The system marked it as low confidence. That means it wasn't sure, so it labeled it normal. Mildred frowned. So instead of asking for a second opinion, it just shrugged and said I was fine? Dr. Lin hesitated, embarrassed. In a way, yes. It's trained to prioritize certainty. When it's unsure, it leans towards safe. Safe for who? Mildred asked quietly. He didn't have an answer. That night, she wrote in her notebook, "The machine measures certainty, not doubt. It counts pixels, not people. It reads images, but never listens." She underlined the word listens twice. A week later, Mildred attended a small support group for cancer survivors at the community center. The women sat in a circle of folding chairs, their voices soft but steady. One woman said, "My scan came back clear too. 6 months later, they found a lump the size of a walnut." Another added, "Mine said benign. Doctor said later the computer confused scar tissue with health." Mildred leaned forward. "Did they ever tell you why?" "They said darker tissue doesn't show contrast as well," the woman replied. "Whatever that means." Mildred sighed. "It means the computer doesn't know how to see us yet." The group fell quiet. It wasn't anger in the room, it was recognition. At her next hospital visit, Mildred asked Dr. Lin another question. If the computer can't see darker cells, why do they still use it for everyone? He took a deep breath. "Because it works for most people." She gave a small smile. "Most people? That's the problem, isn't it?" He looked ashamed. "It shouldn't be." That evening, Laverne came over after work. Her mother sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, her glasses low on her nose. "Mama, what are you doing?" "Research," Mildred said, tapping a stack of articles. "You know this machine has a confidence score. It trusts itself more on white tissue samples than on ours." Laverne sighed. "So it's confident when it's right for them and cautious when it's wrong for us?" "Exactly," Mildred said. "They made a doctor who's brave with some patients and blind with others." She paused, then looked up from her notes. "Do you remember when I taught first grade?" "Of course." "Well, I used to tell my students, if you don't understand something, raise your hand. The machine never raises its hand, baby. It just moves on." Laverne smiled sadly. "Then maybe it's time someone makes it learn how." Later that night, Mildred lay awake, her mind racing. She thought about her mother, who'd passed from lung cancer in the 1980s after years of being told it was just a cough. She thought about her sister, whose tumor had been missed on an X-ray. It struck her that the story hadn't changed, only the machine telling it. She whispered into the dark, "Different century, same blindness." The algorithm didn't fail from hate. It failed from habit. It learned what it was shown and what it wasn't. But when history writes the code, bias becomes invisible ink. Before sleeping, Mildred opened her notebook again. She wrote, "The computer didn't measure fear. It didn't measure pain. It measured brightness, not life." She closed the book and said softly, "That's what it never learned." Next, Mildred collides with the system itself, a policy built to trust the machine over her voice, even when her body was already telling the truth. When Mildred's new doctor confirmed the cancer, his voice was calm but careful. "It's treatable," he said, "but we need to start soon." "Soon," she repeated. "You mean now?" He nodded. "As soon as we can get the insurance cleared." That night, she and Laverne sat at the kitchen table again, surrounded by papers. The word insurance felt heavier than the diagnosis itself. Laverne sighed. "Mama, they still haven't approved the surgery. They said the system doesn't show medical necessity." Mildred looked up. "The system again?" "They use AutoPath for pre-authorizations," Laverne explained. "Since your original report said normal, it's blocking the new claim." Mildred frowned. "So even the part that found the mistake has to argue with the part that made it?" Laverne nodded grimly. "Pretty much." The next morning, Mildred called the insurance hotline herself. She waited 30 minutes before a polite voice came on. "Yes, Mrs. Hayes, I see your file. The initial pathology from AutoPath was clear. Based on that, your treatment doesn't meet urgency criteria." "Ma'am," Mildred said, keeping her voice calm, "that same computer almost cost me my life. My doctor has new results." "Yes, I see that here, but it's still under review," the woman replied. "We need system verification." "What kind of verification?" "It needs to go back through AutoPath to confirm malignancy." Mildred blinked. "You mean you're sending it to the same computer that missed it the first time?" The line went silent for a moment. Then the woman said softly, "That's the policy, ma'am." By the end of the week, nothing had changed. Mildred's doctor called daily, but the insurer's algorithm flagged her file as duplicate claim pending. Laverne finally stormed into the clinic office. "My mother's tumor is growing while your system waits for permission from another system." The clerk, looking apologetic, said, "We can't override the automated review. We'd lose compliance status." "Compliance?" Laverne repeated. "You mean safety." "I know how it sounds," the clerk said, "but if we go outside protocol, we risk penalties." Mildred, standing beside her daughter, spoke quietly. "You risk something worse if you don't." That night, Mildred wrote in her journal, "Machines don't have urgency. They don't know what waiting feels like. Policy protects paper, not people." Days later, the church ladies came by again, bringing soup and concern. One of them, Sister Evelyn, said, "Child, this sounds like what happened to my cousin's heart test. They said her scan looked fine until she collapsed." Mildred shook her head. "It's not just the machines, it's the rules that bow to them." Another woman said softly, "Maybe they listen better when money's involved." Laverne smiled bitterly. "Oh, they're listening, just to the wrong heartbeat." A week later, Mildred received a letter in the mail. The first line read, "Your appeal has been denied due to insufficient algorithmic evidence." She stared at it for a long time, then handed it to Laverne. "They're letting the same program decide if I get to live," she said quietly. Laverne took the letter and folded it carefully. "Then we'll make noise louder than their silence." The next morning, they went back to the hospital. Laverne met with Dr. Lynn, who agreed to help them file an emergency complaint. "This isn't medical error anymore," he said. "This is policy malpractice." Mildred smiled faintly. "That's a fancy word for neglect." A few days later, a local reporter called after hearing about her case. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "we're covering patients denied treatment because of AI review systems. Would you share your story?" Mildred thought for a moment. "If it helps someone else get care faster, I will." That evening, her face appeared on the local news. The headline read, "Patient waits while computer reviews itself." The next morning, the insurance company called. "Your treatment has been approved," the representative said quickly. Mildred chuckled softly. Guess the computer finally read the paper. When policies follow code instead of conscience, mistakes repeat themselves in perfect order. Systems built for safety start mistaking silence for proof. That night, Mildred wrote one more line in her notebook. "They said I was low urgency because a machine said I was fine. I'm still here because I refuse to be polite about waiting." Next, Laverne finds the documents that prove what no one wanted to admit. The company knew about the flaw in the data all along, but called it pending validation. Laverne had learned one thing from her mother. If something feels wrong, look for the paperwork. So after the news story aired, she started digging. She filed public requests, called hospital administrators, even pretended to be a student researching medical software. Most people brushed her off politely, but one clerk in a local research lab finally said, "Off the record, you didn't hear it from me, but check the pilot study they filed with the FDA 3 years ago." That night, Laverne searched the government database until midnight. When she finally found the file, her stomach turned. On the first page, it read, "Autopath Model Validation, Phase 1, Dataset Composition, 92% European descent, 6% Asian descent, 2% African descent." 2% out of millions of samples. She kept scrolling. One paragraph said, "Model performance optimal on light stain tissue. Further testing on darker pigmentation pending." That single word, pending, made her fists tighten. She whispered to herself, "They knew." The next day, she printed the report and brought it to her mother. "Mama, look at this." Mildred adjusted her glasses and squinted. "What's all this tiny writing?" "It's proof," Laverne said. "They knew the system wasn't ready for everyone." She pointed to the line on the page. "See? Pending. They knew it missed cases like yours." Mildred sighed, leaning back in her chair. So they were still testing on us while calling it progress? Later that afternoon, Laverne met Dr. Lin in his office. He read through the documents, his face growing pale. "I've seen this language before," he said quietly. "It's how companies hide uncertainty. They mark it as pending so they can start selling the software while pretending it's fully validated." "So people like my mother become the test group?" Laverne said. He nodded sadly. "Unpaid and unprotected." The following week, Laverne sent the report to the journalist who had covered her mother's insurance fight. 2 days later, he called back, almost whispering, "Miss Hayes, this isn't just one company. There are 4 others using the same data set." Laverne closed her eyes. "So they're all learning from the same blind spot?" he said softly, "and calling it innovation." That weekend, the story hit the paper. Documents reveal cancer AI lacked diversity in testing. Black women disproportionately missed. The article quoted Mildred's case directly. She trusted the machine that said she was healthy. 6 months later, the truth arrived with a biopsy needle. The story spread fast. Medical forums buzzed with questions about data fairness. Advocacy groups demanded audits. On TV, a company spokesperson appeared again. "We regret any isolated errors and are actively expanding our training data," he said carefully. Mildred, watching from her recliner, chuckled. "Expanding? They should have done that before I almost died." 2 weeks later, Laverne got a letter from a government investigator. It said her complaint was being used as part of a federal review. They wanted her to testify about what she found. That night, she sat at the table with her mother. "They want us to go to Washington, Mama. Tell them what happened." Mildred smiled, her voice steady. "Good. Maybe they'll start seeing the people behind the pixels." Before bed, Mildred opened her notebook and wrote. They wrote pending like it meant patience. It meant pain for people who couldn't afford to wait. She underlined the last sentence twice. Every injustice leaves paper behind, signed, stamped, and dated. When systems fail, the evidence hides not in emotions, but in the footnotes. The next morning, Laverne received an email from another woman across the country. Your story saved my sister, it read. She demanded a second review, and they found her tumor. Laverne showed it to her mother. Mildred smiled through tears. Maybe the computer spoke too late for me, but not for her. Next, the pattern becomes national. From missed tumors to misread scans, the stories pile up, and the system that once bragged about perfection begins to admit its blindness. The morning after the article went national, the phone started ringing. Not just reporters this time, families, nurses, even lab technicians. Each story sounded painfully familiar. A woman from Florida wrote, "My mother's mammogram came back normal, but her tumor was stage 3 by the time they found it. Same software." A retired lab assistant from Chicago said, "We told them the color calibration was off years ago. They said adjusting it would delay rollout." A doctor from Atlanta emailed, "I was told to trust the algorithm. Now I trust my eyes again." By the end of the week, Laverne's inbox was overflowing. Mildred sat beside her, listening as she read each message aloud. When she finished, Mildred said softly, "I guess I wasn't an exception. I was the rule they tried to hide." The following Sunday, their church held a community meeting. People from neighboring towns came, some carrying binders of their own records. One man stood up and said, "My wife's skin condition was misread twice. They said the AI couldn't classify her complexion." Another woman said, "They called mine inconclusive." That was their word for invisible. Mildred listened quietly, her hand resting on her daughter's arm. "This isn't a medical issue anymore," she whispered. "It's a visibility issue." Soon, advocacy groups picked up the cause. The Equal Data Initiative launched a petition calling for fairness audits in all medical AI systems. The slogan spread across social media, #Teach the machine to see. Mildred was invited to speak at one of their online forums. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with each word. "I trusted the machine because everyone told me it was smarter than human error," she said. "Turns out, it just learned human bias faster." The chat flooded with messages of support. "Thank you for saying it plain."
My mom, too.
"We're with you." Laverne watched her mother speak and felt both pride and sorrow. Pride for the strength in her voice, sorrow because it had to come from pain. That same week, the National Health Board announced a review of all AI diagnostic tools used in hospitals. The headline on the evening news read, "Government launches inquiry into algorithmic bias after patient reports." Mildred and Laverne sat side by side on the couch as their story played in the background. The reporter said, "This case may reshape how the medical industry defines accuracy." Mildred smiled faintly. "Funny," she said. "It took imperfection to remind them what accuracy really means." A few days later, Dr. Lin visited them at home. He looked exhausted but hopeful. "They're finally listening," he said. "Hospitals are being told to retrain their systems with new data, real data." Mildred smiled. "Good. Just make sure they don't call it charity. Call it correction." He laughed softly. "You should be teaching ethics, Mrs. Hayes." She chuckled. "I taught first grade for 30 years. This isn't much different. They just use bigger words." Across the country, other stories surfaced. A Black man misdiagnosed with eczema who actually had melanoma. A Latina mother whose lung scans were flagged inconclusive until a doctor rechecked them by hand. Each headline carried the same pattern. AI missed it. Human found it. The phrase technological blindness started appearing in medical journals. Researchers began writing papers about the Hayes case, using Mildred's name as shorthand for the issue. Laverne showed her mother one of the articles. "Look, Mama, they're naming the bias after you." Mildred smiled, half amused, half sad. Well, if it saves somebody, they can call it whatever they want. That evening, Mildred returned to her notebook. She wrote slowly, the words neat and even. They said the machine was neutral, but neutrality means nothing when the data is one-sided. Fairness needs faces. Now it has mine. She closed the notebook and said softly, "Maybe now it'll remember us." When harm repeats across hundreds of bodies, it stops being a mistake and becomes a mirror. The system wasn't broken, it was complete, just incomplete for the wrong people. As fall arrived, Mildred received a letter from the Equal Data Initiative. It thanked her for turning silence into sight. She smiled, folded it neatly, and tucked it inside her notebook. Laverne asked, "You keeping that?" "Yes," Mildred said, proof that being seen can start with one voice. Next, Mildred joins the movement to fix what the system forgot. From patients to policymakers, the fight shifts from blame to rebuilding, teaching machines to see every shade of health. By winter, the calls stopped feeling like chaos and started to sound like purpose. The Equal Data Initiative invited Mildred and Laverne to join their leadership council, a team of doctors, researchers, and patient advocates fighting to change how health technology was built. Mildred smiled when she read the email. "Imagine that, me on a council," she said. "I barely know how to send a text." Laverne laughed. "You don't need to know the code, Mama. You just need to know what happens when it forgets people." Their first meeting was held in a hotel conference room in Washington, D.C. The air buzzed with quiet urgency. On one side of the table sat patients like Mildred. On the other, representatives from the software companies now under investigation. A young developer in a gray suit spoke first. "We want to make things right," he said. "We're retraining our model with diverse data sets." Mildred leaned forward. "That's a start," she said, "but you're still talking about data. What about people?" He blinked. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I mean, who's deciding what healthy looks like? Whose faces are in your files? Whose voices do you listen to when the math doesn't match the truth?" The room fell quiet. Finally, an older woman from the FDA nodded. "She's right. Fair data means fair participation. We need community oversight, not just internal audits." Over the next few months, Mildred worked with the group to design a new program, the Equal Data Set Project. Its goal? Collect medical images from patients of all races, ages, and backgrounds. When the organization asked for a spokesperson, everyone pointed to Mildred. She laughed. "I'm just a teacher." One of the doctors smiled. "Exactly. You can teach the machine what it missed." A few weeks later, a press conference was held to announce the project. Reporters filled the small hall. Mildred stood at the podium, her hands steady. "They told me my test was normal," she said, "because the computer didn't recognize my body. But my story isn't just mine anymore. Every shade of skin, every shape, every difference deserves to be visible in medicine." Her voice grew firm. "We're not here to destroy technology. We're here to raise its standards, to make sure the next woman doesn't have to translate her pain into code before she gets help." Applause filled the room. Soon after, the Department of Health and Human Services introduced a new policy. All medical AI systems must undergo representation audits, a mandatory review of who was in the data. They called it the Hayes Reform, after Mildred. Laverne showed her the announcement on her phone. "Mama, look, they put your name in it." Mildred smiled. "Lord, I never wanted fame. I just wanted fairness." A few months later, the first retrained version of AutoPath was released. It included new data from clinics across the country, including Mildred's own hospital. When she went in for her follow-up, the technician said, "We've added more samples this time. Yours helped teach the system." Mildred chuckled. "So I gave them my cells twice, once to save me, once to save someone else." The technician smiled. "That's real progress." That evening, she sat on the porch with Laverne, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops. "Feels good to know it wasn't all for nothing," Laverne said. Mildred nodded. "It's funny. I used to think power meant money or education. Turns out it's just persistence. You keep showing up until someone listens." Reform doesn't come from experts. It comes from experience, from those who lived through the silence and refused to accept it as normal. Machines can't fix themselves, but people can fix what they build if they start by admitting what they forgot. Before bed, Mildred wrote her thoughts in her notebook. Who can fix it? The ones the system ignored. How can they fix it? By making sure no one else has to whisper to be heard. She smiled and closed the notebook. "Now," she said softly, "the machine finally has teachers who look like me." Next, Mildred's journey comes full circle. From silence to reform, she finds peace knowing that her story and her body helped rewrite the future of care for generations to come. Different, comforting, respectful. A new technician named Rosa smiled warmly as she prepared the scanner. "Ready, Miss Hayes?" Mildred nodded. "Always." Rosa adjusted the settings and said proudly, "This machine runs the updated version of AutoPath. Every scan is reviewed by both the system and a human pathologist." Mildred smiled. "Good. I like when the computer has company." They both laughed softly. When the test ended, Mildred dressed slowly, her joints stiff but her heart calm. As she walked toward the front desk, she noticed a small poster pinned to the wall. In bold letters, it read, "The Hayes Standard. Fair data, human review. Built from every patient for every patient." She stopped for a moment, staring at her own name. Not as a headline, not as a case file, but as a promise. Rosa noticed her pause and said, "That's you, isn't it?" Mildred grinned. "Guess so. Funny how a mistake can turn into a rule." Outside, Laverne was waiting by the car. "How was it?" she asked. "Different," Mildred said. "They saw me this time." Laverne smiled. "They better. You're practically in the manual." Mildred laughed. "Imagine that. The teacher becomes the test question." They drove home in quiet contentment, the radio humming soft jazz. That evening, Mildred sat on her porch, the spring breeze brushing her face. She opened her old notebook, the same one she'd written in through fear, anger, and hope. Now, the pages near the end were almost full. She turned to a clean sheet and wrote, "The first test said I was healthy. The truth came late, but not too late to matter." Maybe that's the lesson. Sometimes the world learns in delay, just like the machine did. She paused, tapping the pen gently against the page. We can't fix the past, but we can teach the future to look harder. A few days later, a reporter from a medical journal came to interview her. "Miss Hayes," he asked, "what do you think changed the most?" Mildred thought for a moment. "The machines got smarter," she said, "but the people finally got humble. They stopped trusting numbers more than stories." The reporter nodded. "That's beautiful." "It's true," she said. "You can't measure fairness with math. You have to feel it." That weekend, the Equal Data Initiative hosted a small ceremony to celebrate the first year of reform. They gave Mildred a plaque that read, "For teaching technology to see humanity." She smiled and said softly, "I just told the truth loud enough to get through the static." As the event ended, Dr. Lin approached her. "The new models are already performing better," he said. "Fewer misdiagnoses, more accurate scans across all skin tones." Mildred nodded. "That's what progress sounds like, quiet but steady." He smiled. You did this. She shook her head gently. We did this. The moment I spoke up, people started listening. The moment people listened, the machine learned. Later that night, she sat by her window, the notebook open one last time. The street outside was calm, the air thick with the smell of spring rain. She wrote her final lines in neat, patient handwriting. The test result came too late, but the lesson arrived on time. Technology can't heal what it refuses to notice. But if we teach it to look again, really look, maybe it will start to see us all. She closed the notebook, placed it on the table, and whispered, "Now it knows my name too." Mildred Hayes didn't destroy the machine. She rewired it with her story. The next time a patient sits in that same chair, the system will recognize more than tissue. It will recognize humanity. Because every reform begins with the late truth finally heard on time. Medicine should never confuse silence with health. The Hayes Standard 2028. If this story moved you, share it. Someone you love may still be waiting for their all clear. Subscribe to Older Black Person Stories when data meets dignity for more real stories about courage, care, and the people teaching technology how to see.